Maayong na adlaw sa inyo na tanan, sir, classmates. Today, we will be reporting to you the chapter 3 together with my groupmates. But before that, allow me to introduce myself. I am Bacalanius Marvin and I will be reporting to you the introduction and part 1. But before we begin to the main topic, as you can see on the screen, our objective for today's report is first, the primary object of this chapter is to investigate the resonance between Leibniz and Yangming from two different angles. Number 2 is the glaring similarity in their metaphysics point to a shared awareness of limitations of metaphysical system that takes the laws governing natures of the physical world as the first principle. The third, the primary role of the mind and in a moral and philosophical inquiry. And the last is the necessity of turning morals to metaphysics. Now, as you can see, the chapter 3 talks about Leibniz and Wang Yangming on the joining morals of metaphysics. First, let's look for Leibniz history. As you can see on the screen, Leibniz is born in 1646 and died at 1716. He is a German philosopher with the first Western philosopher who writes extensively on Chinese metaphysics. His various writing on China and his discourse on the natural theology of the Chinese that triggers Father Niccolo and Father Anton and critics Donald. Leibniz draws frequently on Junji's metaphysical concepts such as Li as the first principle and Qi as the force and Taiji as the prime mover to elaborate and justify his own philosophy. Upon reading to the handout that was given by Sir, you can see a paragraph there at chapter 1, Leibniz Spiritual and Moral Readings of Junji's Li or First Principle and Chinese Sun Bu, Soul and Body. The paragraph says that the first principle of Chinese is called Li. What that is reason or the foundations of all nature, the most universal reasons and substance. From the Li or Qua, Li emanates 5 virtues: pity, justice, religion, and prudence and faith. So which means for Leibniz, he interprets the first principle Li is what sustain the 5 cardinal virtues constituting Confucian ethics, and these cardinal virtues are what we call the pity, justice, religion, prudence, and faith. So he concludes that Li is the only principle of the physical, is not only the principle of the physical basis of heaven and earth and other material things, but also the first principle of moral basis of virtues, custom, and other spiritual things. In short, Leibniz believed that Li as the first principle of heaven and earth does not only apply to the material things but rather to our moral and spiritual beings. Now let's talk about the explanations of soul and the body. Let's bear in mind everyone that Hun Pu means Hun as the soul and Pu as the body. As you can see on the screen, you can read there, this Chinese says Longobardi that the death of a man is only the separations of the elements of which it is composed and which return after this separation to the places which are proper to them. Those the Hun or soul raises to heaven and the Pu or the body returns to the earth. The Chinese concept of immortality of the soul will become clearer if one interprets ancient Chinese doctrine as saying that souls receive reward and punishment in afterlife. With all this criticism, Leibniz's logic is the lack of the concept of Chinese philosophy like paradise and hell does not mean that Chinese philosophy has no doctrines of immortal soul. If Chinese ethics is natural theology, it must have an immortal soul to receive reward and punishment. In fact, he contends an immortal soul could be read from ancient Chinese doctrine. He refers to not classical but Neo Confucian philosophy.
Good day everyone, I'm discussing about Zeus's concept of key, force, and Leibniz metaphysics of the monad. Leibniz' intelligent reading of Zeus enables him to justify his conception of a motive and perceptive monad. Leibniz' reading of Zeus and key are premised upon his overall metaphysical assumption of the first principle. Leibniz nevertheless departed from his notable processor in his attempt to conceptualize this thinking mind in terms of monads. Leibniz formulates his Cartesian or metaphysics of monad by revising not only the Aristotelian but also Cartesian philosophy. For Leibniz, consideration of substance is of the greatest importance and fruitfulness for philosophy. Leibniz monad is the simplest substance that serves as the key and mortar of our thought. Monad as a substance that is truly one. Leibniz monad distinguishes two unique features. This is representative and motive nature. Representative nature is definition of monad as a living mirror or a mirror to represent the universe from its own point of view. For Leibniz, mind or soul is a monad with distinct perception and accompanied by memory, and the monadic mind or soul necessarily has the same representative feature. This explains why our soul expresses God, the universe, and all essences as well as all existence. Leibniz monadic mind or soul entails the universal principle of nature, absent in the Cartesian cogito. Leibniz monad is not only a representative mirror, but also a mirror inclined with internal action, and this action is possible by force. Primitive motive force that constitutes the substantial principle embodied by the monad, a force that is called soul or mind in living beings. Leibniz spiritual, moral, and intelligent reading of Zeus's Li and Ki raise the crucial questions of metaphysical and spiritual foundation of Confucian ethics. Zeus's Li is a cosmic and ontological, but not a theological principle. Ki refers to the material forces that emit all manners of being rather than the sources of active and intelligent spirit. Yangming metaphysics of mind and his theory of innate conscience offer move solution to the moral and spiritual issues raised by Leibniz. Chinese sin means at once mind and heart, but it refers mainly to the mind in philosophical discourse. That sin is the director that regulates and his physical and moral actions sound very much like the mind in Yangming sensu. Shangdi or Chart Su is another way to put out heaven or the heavenly principle in Chinese philosophy. That sin is the same as heavenly principle proves where other than the central of sensu, the mind is the principle, and when the mind is not concluded by private desires, it is the heavenly principle.
Leibniz on memory and the unity of moral and metaphysical sound. Leibniz proposed the two concepts, the innate ideas and memory. To evoking Yangming's Susi, Leibniz' injunction to join moral metaphysics circles directly Yangming's moral metaphysics centered on the concepts of innate nature and innate conscience. Innate ideas means what allow us to reach the truth both of the beings of the self and beings of beings. For Leibniz, it is through knowledge or necessary truths and through their abstraction that we rise to reflective acts. Given that the being of the self represents the beings of beings, individual identity consists in both our person and our substance. Our persons for Leibniz, what refers the morality identity, and our substance that he means metaphysics identity. Soul, since it is by means of the soul or form that the soul, since it is by means of the soul or form that the true unity corresponding to what we call the self, moi. Moi means average, or in us we call constituent. The soul ensures the only metaphysical but also a moral identity, and it is memory or the knowledge of this self that renders it capable of punishment or reward. As a representing individual substance, that is what Leibniz observed. For the soul, retain the memory obtained via its organs, body, and soul should closely interact rather than separate from each other. The hypothesis of a pre-established harmony thus allowed Leibniz to resolve the Cartesian's dyad that proves a adherence to conceive the union of moral and metaphysics.
Hello, my name is Nicholas Ponce and I'm going to be discussing two topics. The first one is Yangming's innate conscience and the unity of morals and metaphysics. In the previous topic, Leibniz said that it's memory that connects morals to metaphysics, but for Yangming, it's the innate conscience. Though both terms are different, they mean the same thing in the sense that they unite morals to metaphysics, and in Yangming's case, it means that we already existed with morals. To be specific, those morals are benevolence, justice, courtesy, and wisdom. Yangming's study explains that by knowing the self more, it means we're knowing more about heaven. So how does it all tie together? The explanation for that is that our innate nature or morals came from heaven, and so by understanding the nature of our morals, we can also understand heaven. This in turn is how morals connects to metaphysics. We already had the idea of things being right and or wrong, and for Yangming, those ideas were from heaven, which means that morals was connected to metaphysics from the start. The next topic, the unity of knowledge and action in Yangming and Leibniz's metaphysics, is the idea that our thought and actions are one and the same. Both Yangming and Leibniz acknowledge and support this with their own views. Basically, we already see this proof before us. Whenever we have a thought of doing something, we'll do it, and we're either aware or unaware of it, but the thought was there with the action. Not only that, but this connects to our morals. With our morals being already together with our thoughts, it influences what we do with everyday decision-making situation. Even if we don't think that that's the case, it already was.
Good day, I am Cherilyn Gandilan and I am going to discuss the three notable divergences between Leibniz and Yang. The three notable divergences between Leibniz and the Yangmings is that first, the metaphysics system represented by the two philosophers are informed by a different set of cultural conventions and assumptions. Consistent with a broader religious background of early modern root theology, naturally become the common ground between moral and metaphysics in Leibniz philosophy, which explain why he regards to choose metaphysics as a kind of natural theology. For Leibniz, moral virtue is also a theological virtue. Yangming's ethical virtue is largely a secular one. Second is that the difference between two moral agents, which is the memory and the innate conscience. Leibniz uses memory to bear out the moral and spiritual dimensions of innate ideas. Yangming's concept of innate conscience itself encapsulates the ontological being of the mind. So, the moral sense of right and wrong and the heavenly principle, while memory is literally an empirical and cognitive category that indicates the depository of knowledge or experiences. In yet conscience is at once a moral, metaphysical, and epistemological concept. Third is that Leibniz resort the distinction between our person and our substance to bear out the unity of the moral and physical selves. Yangming's and yet conscience epitomize the very union of morals and metaphysics. What marks Yangming's the very, or rather than, the metaphysics of moral is that not only differentiates between metaphysicals and temporal virtues, but also spells out their intrinsic connections. Yangming's supreme benevolence and supreme justice points to metaphysical virtue, while benevolence and justice refers to specific form of moral virtues. In Yangming's very view, to grasp temporal virtues require competition, which is competition of metaphysical virtues, which pour out or prove more than innate nature. So, despite these divergences, however, the key assumption about necessity of grounding moral upon metaphysics lies at the heart of both Leibniz and Yangming's metaphysics. And that will be all. Thank you for listening.